This is from Maine with Love, an Allagash brewing podcast where we talk about beer, our community here in Maine, and things that generally make us happy. And I'm very happy to welcome Paul Hunt, the Environmental Services Manager of Portland Water District, and Matt Markot, Executive Director of Loon Echo Land Trust, and as always, Liz Wilson here.
Hey.
And I'm Brett Willis, Senior Communications Specialist at Allagash.
So, Brett, we talked with our friends from Sebago Clean Waters today. We talked with Paul and Matt, and, Sebago Clean Waters doing some really great work to help conserve the land around Sebago Lake, which is the watershed that we belong to here in Portland. And I will just say, I'm feeling great.
Yeah.
It was a really positive and optimistic outlook on the work they're doing. And so, I don't know.
Yeah. And if you're the type of person who thinks water is not cool, then this is not the podcast for you, because this makes water really cool. It's fascinating. And agreed. It's like, I say it during the podcast, but this is like one of the most hopeful things I've heard in the past 3 years. So I'm like, I am jazzed up by the conversation we had about water conservation.
So tune in, grab a glass of water.
Yeah.
And tune in to
a cool glass of water. Yeah. And listen to how Sebago Clean Waters is going about conserving land around Sebago Lake, the source of all of the water that we at Allagash use. And it's the number one reason Allagash beer tastes good. Jason's going to be really angry about that. Our brewmaster would not like it. No, it is one of the many reasons why our beer tastes great, because it is incredible. You're going to learn some facts about this water that's going to kind of blow your mind. So if that sounds good to you.
Well said.
Give it a listen. Before we dive into the topic at hand, which is going to be talking about Sebago Lake, our water source here at Allagash, and for many people in Maine, and also efforts that Paul and Matt are undertaking to preserve that water source, I got to ask some good secret questions for each of you. We started it this way. It's going to be a question that you actually want to answer, I hope. So, Paul, we're going to start with you. I've heard you're a fan of music, mostly from some 60s era music, that sort of thing. What's the most memorable live performance that you've witnessed? I was going to say favorite, but I feel like memorable is, it's a little more open.
I saw Wilco in Lowell, Mass. I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago. I've seen them 31 times now, but I don't remember which one that was. Maybe it was my 23rd or 24th, but it started pouring. I mean, really pouring. And so for about 20 minutes, my brother and I were trying to stay dry. And then I just reached this moment where I thought, no, I don't want to stay dry. And I just embraced it. And my shoes were full of water. And it was like you dipped me in a lake, and I loved it. I thought, this is what rock and roll is supposed to be.
That's awesome.
That is an amazing answer. All right, Matt, yours. Here you enjoy the outdoors, particularly some downhill skiing. What is your favorite type of trail? Are you a blue square, black diamond, double black, or a backcountry person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like it all. Okay. Put me on 2 pairs of skis. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. Downhill, uphill, sideways, upside down. I guess my philosophy about skiing is whoever's having the most fun is winning the day. And so it doesn't really matter in that sense, like who's, what your objective is or what you're trying to ski. You could be skiing for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And if you're having the most fun, then you're winning the day as far as I'm concerned. But
I love it.
What a great ski season we've had here in the Northeast. It's been it's been a weird one, but it's a lot of good skiing. And we're jealous of our friends out west, but they need the water. So happy for them.
It's good. That's good. I feel like when I'm a snowboarder, and I much of my experience is putting too much pressure on myself. Like, I should be doing more stuff. I should be hitting that jump. But then I agree. Like, I'll become a blue person. Just kind of cruise, get some good speed, get some sort of snow on the sides. It's good. I like that philosophy. Liz, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready, Brett.
Liz always gets a question. All right. Most memorable recent food experience in Portland.
Gosh, lots to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the Garrison for the first time, maybe in March for my husband's birthday. And it was so lovely. And it was like a really crummy night. It was like drizzly, freezing cold, but you're right on the river and it was pretty quiet. And so we got to chat with the staff and just hear about all the foods. They have sort of small plates, I guess, and they're all super interesting. And I love a good small plate because then I can try a lot of different things. And so I think that is probably my most memorable food experience recently. But
nice.
You all know I'm at Tandem at least once a week. So it's that's my go-to.
Good. Just so
all right, Brett.
Oh,
we don't leave you out
again. Oh man.
What's your favorite hour of the day?
Whoa, that takes me by surprise. Oh man. I'll give you one. I'll give you a very specific one. 5 a.m. when I wake up before my children have woken up, I know they're going to wake up soon, but if I get a chance to make coffee and then read a little bit at 5 a.m. before it's even light, that's like
I'm right there with you.
Me.
I'm usually 6 to 7 before I have to like really think about what's happening.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, diametrically opposed to all the 2 o'clock people. Whoever's 2 o'clock out there, 2 o'clock can just be expunged from the record. I don't know. I don't like 2. No, actually, you can cut that out of the podcast. I don't really have anything against 2. All right.
We're going
to start. Yes. All right. I think, Paul, we're going to start with you. And I think that the place to start is kind of is helping people become acquainted with Sebago Lake itself, what we're talking about today. And so I've watched some footage you've provided of some talks you've given, and there are some incredible facts around Sebago Lake. So to rattle a few off, it's the second largest lake in Maine. It's the deepest lake in Maine, and it makes us, as I've heard you say, Paul, kind of the Saudi Arabia of water here in Maine. We have an abundance of water. And so can you kind of put the amount of water in Sebago Lake into perspective so that someone can kind of grasp that?
Sure. Sebago Lake has about 1 trillion gallons of water. And I used to think 1 trillion was the same as infinite. Like if you said that number to me 10 years ago, I would have said, well, that's like you'd never reach the end of it. And then there was the great financial collapse of 2008. And we heard about trillions of dollars being lost overnight. So I know it's not infinite, but it's a very big number. And it's this big. Our customers consume 22 million gallons of water in a day. And so over 365 days, that's 8 billion. So 8 billion gallons is a lot of water, but we have more than 800 billion. So in Sebago Lake. So therefore, that's 100 years. I guarantee you there are communities in California that have 1 year in their reservoir, maybe 3 years. Wow. We have more than 100 years. So we really, if you ever read in the paper that Portland, Maine is short of water, then Armageddon has happened. That will not happen to us before it happens to virtually everybody else. And so we're very fortunate, and we have an obligation to, in my view and in our view, to future generations, to treat it like it's as precious as it is.
Totally. You had another one too about like the amount of water we could give to every person on Earth currently from just Sebago Lake.
Well, there are 8 billion people on Earth, right? So that's 100 gallons per person, and we wouldn't run out for every single human being on Earth. Right. That's how much water is in Sebago Lake.
So nuts.
And Sebago Lake, I think it's around 200,000 people it serves roughly.
Yes,
and that is sort of the greater Portland area. Are we consuming average amounts of water? 22 million? Is that what you said? A day?
Yes.
That feels like a lot of water.
Yeah.
But I would answer it this way, that we all imagine, and I just got this number recently, or this graph, and so it surprised me. We all imagine that as population grows, as there are more people, we're just consuming more and more of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We have been providing about between 18 and 22 or 24 million gallons per day every day since 1963. I saw the graph, and it's flat.
Wow.
It's flat. And yet we're adding about 500 new services, a service meaning a connection to the system, like a house would be connected. That's a service. We add about 500 each year. And we've been doing that, steadily. That happen, because there's more houses built and more connections, and yet we're not consuming more water. So that's another piece of good news. You don't get good news that often, but we have 100 years worth of water. Our population has grown since 1963 in Greater Portland, but we are still using about the same amount of water as a society, as a community as we were then.
Do you have a hypothesis for why that would be? Is it efficiency or?
There's no.
I'm sure multiple factors.
No question that there's efficiency. People are more mindful. You buy a new toilet nowadays, and it uses a gallon instead of it using 5 gallons, and all of that combined, it's a really good thing to think about, because sometimes can it feel like the challenges of environment are so big that there's nothing anyone can do. Oh, throw up your hands and just forget it. Well, actually, when we work together, that's individual decisions being made in every home, all added together actually has resulted in we can provide water to more people without using up more of the resource.
It's like the most optimistic thing I've heard in like 3 years.
Wow. We're getting off on a great foot. Yeah.
So another thing that actually ties to this, I think this sort of idea of things remaining static over the years is the quality of the water. So can you talk a little bit to the quality of the water in Sebago Lake?
Of course, there are 100 different ways to measure water quality, and we don't have time to go over all 100 of them. So I'm just like 95. I'm just going to give you 2 examples. One thing that a water utility like ours does is every single day we test the lake water before we've done any treatment at all. So this is what we call raw water. This is what's in the lake. And any lake is going to have some bacteria in it. There are birds flying over it. There are animals. There are people in the watershed. There are people swimming in the lake. So you're not going to it would not be unreasonable to expect, and we always, anybody that samples from a lake is going to detect some bacteria. So the Safe Drinking Water Act says a system such as ours needs to test for the raw water every day for fecal coliform bacteria. And as the name implies, these are bacteria that you would associate with the warm-blooded mammals and the intestinal tract of warm-blooded mammals. Okay, so we test that every day, and the number has to be fewer than 20 colonies per 100 milliliters of water 90% of the time. So what that means is that when we take a sample, 10% of the time, we could get a number bigger than 20, and that's still okay. Because remember, the water is about to be disinfected 3 times.
Right.
But you don't want to see a lot of fecal bacteria in your raw water, even though you're disinfecting it. Okay, so we can fail that test, is a way to put it, 10% of the time, and we're still okay. We've done that test. The requirement started in the early 90s. We've done it about, I think the number I last calculated was 7,000 times. So if we've done that test 7,000 times and we can fail it 10% of the time, that means 700 times we could have had a number greater than 20 and we would be okay. 700. We've had a number over 20 twice in 30 years of testing. So Sebago Lake is not only is it an enormous quantity of water that we're so lucky to have, it is of outstanding quality. Like when we show these numbers to our colleagues in other states and in even other parts of Maine, they don't accuse us of faking it, but it almost seems unreal. Like it just seems too good to be true.
Yeah.
And
so how are we faking it
Sure, Paul.
Can you let us know how
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'll give you one other example, and that's turbidity. You just as the name implies, turbidity is how much crud is kind of floating around the water. Could be algae, could be dirt. So we measure that continuously. So there's a meter on the intake as the water is drawn in from the lake. It's running through this device that shines light through it. And the amount of light that gets deflected away is a measure of how much turbidity is in the water. We have to stay under 5. The turbidity units doesn't matter, but under 5. Our numbers, we have it continuously. I can show you the graph over 10 years. it's never been over 0.5. In fact, it's usually under 0.3, and it never varies. We can get a storm event. It doesn't make any difference because we're drawing water off the bottom of this trillion gallons of water. So it's sort of protected from, I'm sure at the surface, if you have a big rain event, you would see the turbidity rise a little bit up there, but down where we're drawing the water from, we never see a number that's even close to 10% of what we have to be under. So there's another example of we just have such a precious resource that we are gifted with. Let's just not mess it up, I guess, is the way the advice I would give.
Totally. So I've got one for Matt then that ties directly to this. So the quality of the water is not necessarily coming from the lake itself, but the land around the lake. Could you kind of talk a little bit to how that works?
Yeah, so the land around the lake, otherwise known as a watershed, is supplying all of that water into the lake itself. Whenever there's a rainstorm or we have snow melt, that water ends up back into the lake. It's flowing through rivers, streams, sometimes culverts, etc., making its way slowly, sometimes quickly, back into Sebago Lake.
There you go. And so it's the quality of that land around the lake that is giving us the quality of the water within the lake. And so, I guess what are some of the main factors? Like, what are the most important parts of that land around that makes it so the water is getting filtered?
We've got a heavily forested landscape in the Sebago Lake watershed, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The legacy of land ownership in the Sebago Lake watershed is not that different from land ownership throughout Maine. There's a long history here of industrial land ownership, supplying raw material to paper mills in Westbrook, like Sappi and elsewhere, and the dominant land owning regime for decades and decades and decades in the watershed was for the commercial production of timber. And if you want to sell trees, you need to have trees on the landscape. Sure. And that's one of the reasons. And there are many others as well, just a long legacy of private land ownership of folks who have been great stewards and an ethos of stewardship, forest land stewardship in Maine. It's a story of Mainers doing what Mainers do, which is spending time on their land and deriving income from it when and how they can.
Interesting.
I think between that and what Paul mentioned, so what do we do with this sort of precious resource? And, we've been fortunate as a brewery to work alongside you in partnership for a few years now. So tell us a little bit about Sebago Clean Waters and the efforts that you have come to sort of create to make, I feel like, a greater impact as a group of people instead of any single entity trying to protect Sebago Lake.
Yeah, I'll start probably back in the 80s, before I was born. Age myself there really quickly. Millennials, shout out.
There you go.
And in the 80s in Maine, there was a big transition in land ownership happening all throughout the state. Paper mills that had been vertically integrated, meaning they own the mill, they own the land, they own the resource. That model was changing, that dynamic was changing, and we were seeing in Maine a large transition in land ownership. And with that sort of became, and for other reasons as well, evolved the land conservation movement as we know it today in Maine. The land trust that I work for, Loon Land Trust, was formed in 1987. That's like the year. It feels like when land trusts were formed. It's like 1985, 1986, 1987.
They just made one seal and everyone used it. So
that's right. Yeah. And so our land trust has been working to conserve land in the watershed since then. And, like a lot of sort of, grassroots startup nonprofits for the first 10, 15, even 20 years of the land trust's existence, it was led by volunteers. It wasn't until 2000 that the land trust had its first full-time staff and did a lot of great work. Did it at a I don't want to call it a slow pace, but a pace that I think was indicative of that grassroots effort and the ability, capacity, resources that were available.
Yeah.
And then in the 2000s, a predecessor at Loon Echo, a former executive director, had this great idea to get in touch with Paul at Portland Water District and say, hey, we think that our land conservation work is probably having an impact on your water resource downstream. I mean, the science is, pretty clear there.
Yeah.
How would you like to help us protect land? And there was a land deal that the Land Trust was working on, and Paul can probably talk more about that specific moment of literally when the first financial contribution from Portland Water District was made to a land conservation project in the watershed. But that was the start. And as land trusts have gone since then, and I'm speaking just to the sort of movement as a whole, we've gotten a lot more sophisticated. We've become more professional. We understand how to gain access to resources, financial resources. And of course, the need for the services that we provide has just continued to increase for a variety of reasons. Totally. And so in 2015, 16, somewhere around there, we sort of got together and said, let's do more. Let's do even more than what we're doing. And we solicited the help of our friends at the Nature Conservancy in Maine, Trust for Public Land, regional and national conservation organizations to catalyze the work that was being done. And that's how Sebago Clean Waters was born. And I can say undoubtedly from my position, it has worked. And what we've been able to do since then is significantly increase the pace of land conservation in the watershed, really in response to changes here in southern Maine. Totally. We're seeing development pressures increase. We're seeing people move here. It's great. Who doesn't want to live in Maine, right? That's
yeah.
I can't blame people for wanting to be here. We want to welcome people here, but we've got to figure out how to do development in a way that's not going to impact these resources, especially our water resources.
Totally. So I have two follow-up questions. Follow-up question one is, who are the members of Sebago Clean Waters for our listeners?
Paul, help me out if I leave anybody out here. I believe now we're up to 10.
Really? Oh,
10
I thought
members.
It was 7. Yep. That was where my brain was at. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So of course, Portland Water District, the land trust I work for, a Loon Echo Land Trust based out of Bridgeton, Western Foothills Land Trust based in Norway, Lakes Environmental Association, it's a lake association based in Bridgeton as well, Mahoosic Land Trust based in Bethel. I mentioned Trust for Public Land, which is a national conservation organization, the Open Space Institute. I may have said the Nature Conservancy in Maine already. The Highstead Foundation, which is a conservation foundation based in Connecticut. Paul, who else am I missing here? The Casco Bay Estuary Partnership.
I was going to add that.
That's a program of the University of Southern Maine based in Portland. And if you're looking for another podcast, content for their podcast, the story of Casco Bay and what has happened in Casco Bay in the last 40 years is another incredible story of resource protection here. And Paul, Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, which is a Portland-based land conservation organization.
I think you got all of them. I wasn't counting. I will feel terrible if we left anybody out, because
we can make sure we can put it in the notes on our podcast.
Yes.
What I want to add to that was a great job, Matt. You get the A for remembering all of the organizations. We're very different. Like, there's a water utility, there's some land trusts, there's some national conservation organizations, there's an estuary partnership, there's a lakes association. And you might say, why are they all at the same table working together? And the answer is conserved forest yields so many different benefits, not just clean water, which it does. It's critical to clean water. And that's what sort of first brought us to the table. But others joined us because they said, well, what about sustainable forestry? Many of the lands that are conserved through our effort are working forest lands. So they're producing woods jobs and woods products as they're cleaning the water. There's wildlife habitat is being conserved and protected and connected. Like, if you can protect several pieces of property, that gives deer more room to roam, which is really important. There's fisheries, there's cleaner air, there's carbon sequestration, which is kind of when I first heard that word, I thought that's a terrible word for it, but it's like locking up carbon in the soil and in the trees so that it's not in the atmosphere where it's leading to changes in climate. So all of those things. I often say to people, you can either spend $8 doing 8 different things or spend $1 on forest conservation and 8 good things come out of it. And so the partnership is so powerful because each partner brings a different kind of skill set and a different ethic and a different, we're related, we have related goals, but they're different. And therefore it's almost like, I'm not sure how to do this. Matt, do you know how to do this? And he'll say, oh, Loon Echo's done that many times. And so then they're contributing that. Other times they'll say, can the water district do this? And, oh yeah, that's easy for us, but hard for you. And you have to kind of leave ego behind, organizational ego, and you just have to hold hands sort of and say, let's do this together.
That's awesome.
Talk a little bit about some of your goals and, as a collective, and then, where you are today since sort of Sebago Clean Waters was formed.
And I think I have a question that might come right before that'll lead you into it. So, Paul, you've talked about the sort of strides that have been made to preserve or conserve this land, and kind of like laying out what happened in like the previous 100 years of Portland Water District, and then what has happened in the previous 20, I guess.
Great, I love that question. Okay, so land has been conserved in the watershed even before 1987, when as Matt points to, like year one for the land trust. Yep. Because there's Sebago Lake State Park, there's a little bit of White Mountain National Forest in the watershed, and there are conserved lands of other types. And the Water District purchased some land over the last century around the Lower Bay, which is where our water intakes are. So I call it the green collar around Lower Bay, is land that we've purchased and that we own to protect the lake. Mm-hmm. All that together, 150 years of conservation conserved about 10% of the land area in the watershed, as Matt said. All the land around the lake that drains in the lake is called the watershed. 10% of it is conserved forest. 90% of it, or 85 or so, is forest, is healthy forest. But you can see the gap there, that it's healthy forest, right, but it's privately owned and therefore could be developed. So our goal is to get that number from 10% conserved to 25% conserved. We're already up almost to 16%. So 150 years, 10% got conserved. In 20 years, another 6%, and we're still going. And 25% is a more in line with what a water supply really, there really should be. Others have 80% of their watershed protected. Sometimes it's 75, sometimes it's 30. 10% is really at the low end. And so so here's the great irony, is we have the most quantity of water, of anybody that any water utility I know who really has 100 years worth of water in reserve, and it's outstandingly clean because of the forest. But the forest is not protected from development. And we're not trying to prevent development. As Matt said, we need development. We need people to move to, people are going to move to Maine and they need a place to live. And we are supportive of that. But if we can get the watershed up to 25% conserved, and then the rest of it is well managed and cared for as it has been, we'll be in so much better, we'll be handing something to our children and our grandchildren that they will thank us for.
It just kind of raises a question that I've always had, is like, what is the difference between good development and sort of less good development? What are we looking for out of that?
And I'll tell you that, we're not developers. We're not planners, sure. Right? We are, I'm a land conservation practitioner. Paul's a water scientist, but we have opinions, both personal and professional, about this.
Sure.
And the type of development that we don't want to see in the watershed is what most people think about as sprawl.
Okay.
Sprawl development. There has been this sort of ethos or way of being in many rural parts of the country that associates density with bad environmental outcomes. There's this idea that, if I go live in my 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 acres and care for it, that I'll be doing better by the environment. And not to say that folks who have their, little slice of heaven out here in rural Maine aren't great stewards of their land. Right. But again, as more people are moving here, we've got to look at what the data and what the science tells us. And what that tells us is that higher density development is better for environmental outcomes. Here's an example. If you can take a 100-acre piece of land, if we can concentrate our development on 15 acres of it, and protect the remaining 85 acres, that's going to lead to a better environmental outcome.
That's great.
In order to create the the types of services and development that we need on the 15 acres to provide for a growing population, we've got to be smart and innovative and creative about what that development looks like. So thinking about where services are related to people. This is especially an issue in rural communities where people are driving 40 minutes sometimes to get to a grocery store, or 30 minutes to get to a doctor,
right.
or there's kids on school buses. They're spending an hour and a half on the school bus to get to school in rural Maine. So, anyways, that's the paradigm that we want to use and that we believe in terms of that relationship between development and environmental and natural resource protection.
And I think it's worth mentioning that Sebago Lake is not in a rural part of Maine, and it's a lake that is a multi-use purpose. It's only about 15 miles away from Portland, and so it is a fairly dense, area considering the whole state of Maine, and it is used. There's a lot of homes that surround the lake. Is used for recreational purposes. People enjoy it, so it's not, this is a lake that a lot of people enjoy and is not just solely, for our protected, and
right.
you can't enjoy it. So I think it's worth, for anyone that's listening that's not local to Maine, like this is a lake that gets a ton of use from the community. And so I think as you're talking about development, you of course want to strike that balance where people that come here and, can still enjoy that. And we're also doing the work of keeping it protected for the future.
If you think about, Maine is so prized. Why do people want to move here? Well, I always say there are two types of people in Maine: those who were born here and those that rushed here because it's such a great place. Well, both of those types of people, either you were born here and you never want to leave, or you were born elsewhere and you came here, treasure the woods. I've never met a person who lives in Maine that doesn't treasure the woods. And so what Sebago Clean Waters is trying to do is to keep Maine, which means healthy, working forests, good for water quality, room for people to live. But if you're going to build a house in Maine or come and buy a house or rent, you want woods around you, or you wouldn't come to Maine, you'd go someplace else. And so I've given probably 50 talks about what we're doing over the years, almost since before Matt was born, but not quite that long. But it has been, I've been working on this for a long time, and I've given a lot of talks, and I can read the audience, I think, pretty well. And I also field questions. I've not met a person that doesn't like the idea of, let's conserve some of the Maine forest so that our water is clean. Who's against that? There is nobody against it. And that's why I feel like we have such support. We really have not met anybody. I've not met anybody that says, I don't like what you're trying to do. How we do it and the details of it, okay, we can disagree on maybe a detail here or there. But the goal of what we're trying to do is just keep Maine for all the Maine people who are here now and all the ones who are coming.
So it's kind of a good segue into how have partners helped in that sort of goal. You have everyone who's a part of, Sebago Clean Waters directly has a very direct hand in that. And then I guess we are obviously one of the partners, but I feel like there have been multiple, there have been a lot of people who have been involved in this. So how do partners help?
So, Matt, if I can start, and then I think since you have been much more involved with partners than I have, I want you to take it from there. But I'm going to give you the water district perspective because I was, Matt's predecessor at Loon Echo, who approached me and said, "We're trying to conserve forests. Would the water district help?" I remember thinking, it sounds like a great idea. Like, why wouldn't we? But we didn't have a program for this. We weren't really going down this road independent. It was almost like that idea was born that day, and our board has been so supportive. But what they've also said is there are many beneficiaries. As I talked about earlier, a conserved piece of forest in the watershed does benefit all of our customers, and therefore it would make sense that the water district would be contributing to that. But there are many other beneficiaries: hunting, fishing, all of those other things I said. And so our board said, we will give up to 25% of what it costs to conserve forest, but we need the other partners to bring in the other 75%. And that's a pretty heavy lift to ask Loon Echo Land Trust and other partners. But we felt like that was a fair sort of number to say that's what our customers are benefiting from this, but you find all the other people who are benefiting and let's all bring the money to the table. And so it has worked well, but it's a lot of work to find that other 75% of the funding. And so, Matt, I'm going to turn that over to you so you can talk about that and all the benefits we've received from business partners.
Yeah, I mean, this work is expensive. There's no way around it. We're talking about purchasing real estate. That's what we're doing, and it's expensive. And the other thing too is communicating about this. And that's in this podcast, for instance, telling this story, making sure folks are aware both of this resource and also the threats to it. And to Paul's point, who doesn't like the story? It's an incredible story. Yeah. But the story, the ending is still unwritten. And I believe there's a great ending here, but we don't know that. And we've got this opportunity to write that story, to create our own ending. And that's where partners are just so critical. There are so many things to care about, to be passionate about in the world today. Yeah. It can be overwhelming at times, right? And, where can we as individuals, what are the action steps we can take? What can we do? Where can we apply our passions and our values? And, that's what this is all about, right? We're sharing a value proposition to people. And, if you do a Google search of land trusts, Loon land Trust might be, I don't know, 90th or something, or 9,000. I don't know. Right. It's hard, as you guys know, it's hard to get an audience in a really competitive and large communication space. And so, the work that Allagash and others have done to amplify this story is essential. We couldn't do it without these partnerships, and then the financial support as well. Is critical. Every dollar counts. We're literally, when we're getting ready to close on a piece of real estate, we're literally like counting pennies at the end of the day to make sure everything's adding up. So I tell folks, if they're like, I can only give $5. It's like, well, that might be the last $5 we need to purchase, 1,500 acres of land, and to conserve that and make sure it's available to you and your kids to hunt and hike and mountain bike and ski, et cetera, et cetera. So, Paul's got a great story he likes to tell, or it's not really a story. It's like maybe a fable or something, but it's called partnership. It's called partnership math. Paul's partnership math. And I'm going to try to tell it. Paul, I'm going to tell your partnership math equation here. But 1 + 1 typically equals 2, right? And in a partnership, or at least a well-functioning partnership, 1 + 1 can equal 3 or 5 or 7. And that's the benefit. That's that sort of exponential benefit that partnerships can bring. And partnerships aren't easy, right? And it takes the right partners who understand each other, who are willing to work with each other, that give and take. We're so lucky to have those types of partnerships within Sebago Clean Waters. And let's see, maybe 1 + 1 will equal 20 one day. I don't know. Is there a limit to your partnership?
Well, I mean,
math, Paul?
the contributions that Allagash has given, like Matt said, this podcast we're really grateful because we want people to hear the story. But as you know, Allagash has also contributed money to our cause, and individuals have, and other business partners and foundations. Every one of those contributions is magnified because, as a water utility protecting a drinking water supply, sometimes there are federal dollars that are available to water utilities to do work like this, but it always comes with a match requirement. It's not money that just is handed over to water utility. You have to show that you're and I love the idea of match. When I first started getting into this work, I thought, this match thing drives me crazy. It's so important because it's sort of like the federal government saying, we'll help you to fund your effort, but you have to show us that locally everybody's behind this, or you have, and so every dollar that is donated to Sebago Clean Waters really becomes $2, $3, or $4 because there are federal dollars available to water utilities and to land trusts. Sometimes there can be foundation money, and foundations will often say, "Where's the match?" And we have worked really, really hard, and we value every dollar, as Matt said, every dollar that's contributed makes a difference because it can leverage other dollars, and that's how we've gotten this far. And we're not done. We're in the middle of a process, and but it feels like what I often say to our board is, this is happening in part, because we put the 25% on the table first. Once you do that, then a land trust can say, we've already got a commitment of 25% of what we need. And the donor likes to hear that and says, well, okay, I'll write a check because now I know that it's magnified. And so every dollar from Allagash has made a big difference for us.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear. And I feel like maybe, Brett, you and I should have started at the top of the program with a little bit more context as to why we're having this conversation. But Sebago Clean Waters has been a huge, a wonderful partner of ours for a few years now. And, beside the very large fact that we are a brewery based in Portland, the employees of Allagash live in Portland and consume the water just personally, and water is essential for our livelihoods. But brewing beer is a water intensive process. It's a key ingredient in beer, and so ensuring that we have the quality of water that we have currently in the future is so important to us. And so the work that the Sebago Clean Waters team and partners are doing is just sort of a no-brainer for us to support. And so I think we use, I don't have too many stats here. I think the latest number I heard, Brett, 3.1 gallons of water per gallon of beer. So it's a lot of water that gets used for brewing.
And that's actually, that's taken a lot of work to get down to, honestly, for us, because there are some, I think that's about half the industry average is what we understand. And so there's, there are a lot of breweries that use quite a bit more water for beer, but at the same time, like using as little water as possible and then giving back. The way that we've kind of structured our donations is that we donate 10 cents per barrel of beer that we brew. And so that as we brew more beer, then we donate more money to Sebago Clean Waters to preserve it. And so I think that's so far in our sort of 3 years of being involved, it's been $41,000 ultimately. Is that right, Liz?
Yeah, we just looked this up the other day.
Which is great. And it's great. There's a point that I want to make too that I think Paul and Matt, you were both talking about, is just like there can be this feeling when faced with such a humongous task that is like, I only have, like you said it, Matt, of like that $5, that's all I have. But it's like, it really is every gain we make is like a permanent gain. It's not like that 17% ever goes away. It's just, you just have to creeping up and up and up. And it's like, I don't know, it's pretty inspiring once you see like, if everyone's just putting in a little bit, just kind of keeping it in mind, we can achieve this thing for this. Like, I'm really glad we started talking about Sebago Lake just as a lake, because it's like, I feel like I take it for granted how good the water is here. But then, like hearing about that, thinking about that, every time I go to the tap, I do honestly a little bit. Every time I go to the tap, I'm just like, oh, good old Maine water.
So it's like, either of you will know this stat better than I. It's like one of 50 water sources in the country that doesn't require filtration. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
That is correct. Remember, I mentioned that one measure of lake water quality is turbidity. And if a lake or a river that you're using as a drinking water supply becomes too turbid or has turbid episodes, like after a storm event, which some do, then you have to have some kind of physical barrier between your source water and your customers. In other words, you have to remove the particles so that the disinfection will work efficiently and well. Sebago Lake is one of about 50 or so water supplies in the country out of 13,000, by the way. So 50 out of 13,000 that is so clean that it does not require that filtration step. So not only is that great news, because that means we've got a clean source that can be enjoyed by people for swimming and boating and everything and fishing. So that's great right there. But also the cost of a filtration plant, our last estimate is it would cost $150 million for us to build that. And remember, almost everybody has already done that. 12,950 water supplies have already built that filtration plant. And we're a nonprofit. You would pay for that. It would have to be added to water rates to pay for that. So we don't want to do that. We would rather avoid that, both because that's money we'd rather not spend. It's your money we'd rather not spend. But it also means the lake is cleaner and all the land around it in the watershed is available for habitat and hiking and all that. So like, again, who would be against this? But I would also say that if you were to if a lake were to decline such that you had to build filtration, it could be done. Like engineers could engineer a system to remove the particles. It could be done. I mean, in New Orleans, they use Mississippi River water, which I'm sure is not pristine like Sebago Lake water, right? So it can be done. But to treat water, to remove those particles, you add chemicals to do that, you use power to do that, electricity, and that costs money. And so it's not as safe. Like, what would be safer, to never have the pollutants in the water, or to allow the lake to decline so the pollutants are there and then engineer the removal of them? What would you rather do? Well, of course, you'd rather just never have those pollutants in there. So it's really a no regret strategy, what we're doing, because it's only good things are going to accrue if we can ensure that watershed forest stays healthy.
And it's also a lot cheaper to protect the watershed.
Yeah.
It's a lot, I talked about how expensive it is, and it is expensive, but it's not $150 million expensive. Yeah. Our latest estimates are anywhere from 30 to 75 million to reach our watershed protection goals. And things can change, real estate markets can change, et cetera. The cost of land ownership will change, but that's a lot better than $150 million. And that's just the first time cost. It's the startup cost. That's not including those annual operating costs. So it's, and with a filter, you can't hunt in a water filtration plant. You can't go ride your bike in a water filtration plant.
Right.
You can do that on conservative.
And even though that number is still a big number, the numbers that Matt just put out there, the cost of the land, the water district's trustees have said, we'll contribute up to 25% of that. So take that number and divide it by 4, and you're down in the $10 million range, say, or $150 million, which makes more sense. And so that's really why the partnership formed, because all the partners are better able to reach the goals that we share together. If we all worked separately, it would cost more and we would do less.
Totally.
We had a brewery friend visit a couple years ago from Pennsylvania now.
That's
and
right. Yes.
he was there to enjoy our beer and to show him around Portland. And he was like, yeah, the beer is great, but I just want to take the water home. And we were like, you know what? We're okay with that. He could not get over how good our water tasted here. And I think, like Brett, we can sort of take it for granted because we don't really know anything else, but there are definitely other parts of this country that, this is a really special thing. So
I think the takeaway is pretty clear. I think Matt and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the takeaway is, if you want to be involved or if you want to help out, go to SebagoCleanWaters.com. I think it's actually, I have it right here. It's SebagoCleanWaters.org, actually, or just search Sebago Clean Waters on Google like a normal person who doesn't put in full URLs into their browser. And if you believe in this, if you're near us, or even if you're not near us, I think it's a great idea to help out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And drink Allagash beer.
There you go.
And there are other breweries in Portland who have made, similar pledges or contributions. So, drink beer from Portland, Maine, and enjoy the incredible quality. I mean, I was just out in Utah skiing, of course, talking about skiing, and no offense to Utah and Salt Lake. It's great. It's a great city, but man, the beer is not the same as it is here in Maine. So drink Maine beer. It's incredible. Right. It's incredible. And you can support, this work while you're drinking your beer.
I'd like to make one other point if I could. And that is that I feel like we are all thinking about, how can we treat people more equitably? How can we be more fair? How can we do good by all people, not some people? And I feel so good about the work that we're doing, because the water that is being protected is consumed by rich and poor. Everybody is benefiting. Yeah. And the land that Loon Echo Land Trust and our other partners are conserving is open for public access in many cases. Most of the, it's one of our virtues, or one of our values is we want to conserve forests that will allow public access. So the land is being protected for all, and the water is being kept clean for all equally. It doesn't matter who you are, you're benefiting. And so those kinds of things just make me feel good about every and it's forever too. This is the other thing, is conserve land. When the land trust puts an easement on land, that means these woods are going to treat our water naturally forever. And so, again, when do you get a chance to work on something that is forever for all, and all benefit equally. I just feel so good about it, and I hope people listening will hear that too and be moved to help us.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you both. This was just, it was a joy to talk with both of you and appreciate it. I feel like I am feeling better about the state of being, which can be tough these days.
Yeah,
so really appreciate it, taking the time to join us here.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for
real
having
pleasure.
us.
Great. See you later.
Bye.
That's it. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We did
it. That's it. Well, Paul and Matt, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Really.
Very much
thanks, guys.
appreciate it. Have
Enjoy
a great
your
afternoon.
weekend.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, you too.
Have a great
Bye.
weekend. Bye-bye.
This has been an Allagash Brewing production. And if you have something you want us to talk about on the show, shoot us a message at podcast@allagash.com.